What's happening, my Helmicrons, and welcome back again. Personal story. When I was in 5th grade, we had a unit on debate, and I was told that in order to really understand an issue, you needed to come prepared to argue for both sides of that issue. And that's something that's always really stuck with me. So with that in mind, I did a video recently wherein I ranked all of the Animorphs from my favorite to my least favorite, and I came to the conclusion that Cassie was my least favorite Animorph, and I've always kind of known this. And in the discussions following that video, I realized that she's actually low on a lot of people's lists. When I was making the aforementioned video though, I had a bit of a revelation. Although Cassie was, and remains as of this point in writing the script, my least favorite character, she has some of the very best books in the series. I'm talking about The Departed, The Sickness, even The Unknown here. Why is that? In the interest of better understanding this series and my relation to the characters, I've decided to make a video making the best case that I can that Cassie is in fact the most underrated of the Animorphs. So here it is, the case for Cassie. So where do we start? In my series on Tobias, I started with the invasion, so it makes sense to me to start there again. Cassie is introduced as Rachel's opposite. She's usually wearing jeans and a flannel, she wears her hair super short, she's quiet, and she's peaceful, and Jake specifically notes that she understands everything on a deeper, more mystical level, which is a recurring theme for her character throughout the series. Another important trait that we're introduced to is her ability to diffuse conflict. On the fateful evening that the gang meets, Elfangor, Rachel, and Marco are bickering over whether or not the girls need to be walked home, and Cassie pipes up to say that she would appreciate the company. Jake characterizes this as the ability to stop an argument without making anyone feel bad, which is kind of tragic when you consider where the series is going. Cassie doesn't have Marco's cold pragmatism or Rachel's aggression, but she's got a set of tools that she can use to navigate conflict without running away from it. And when they've met Elfangor, and in his dying moments he asks Jake to go to his ship to get the Escafil device, it's Cassie's warmth and encouragement that actually pushes Jake to do so. When Elfangor's been killed and Jake, furious, almost blows their cover to assault Visser 3, it's actually Cassie who calms him down. She says, "He doesn't want you to die for him. Don't you realize? He's trying to die for us." This moment has some interesting echoes in the conflict over Tom that occurs later in the series, and we'll deconstruct that later for sure. I'll wrap up this breakdown of Cassie's emotional makeup and role within the group by reading a speech that she gives during one of the Animorphs' will we or won't we debates from the invasion. She says, "You know, back in the old days, I mean real old days, the Africans, the early Europeans, the Native Americans, they all believed that animals had spirits, and they would call on those spirits to protect them from evil. They would ask the spirit of the fox for his cunning, they'd ask the spirit of the eagle for his sight, they'd ask the lion for his strength. I guess what we're doing is sort of basic. Even though it was Andalite technology that made it possible, we're still just scared little humans trying to borrow the mind of the fox, and the eyes of the eagle, or the hawk, and the strength of the lion. Just like thousands of years ago, we're calling on the animals to help protect us from evil. It's like all of the basic forces of Earth are being brought into battle." I'm including this for two reasons. One, to establish that Cassie does begin the series pretty firmly pro-war, and two, to make clear her emotional justification for doing so. Cassie loves animals and nature and is characterized as having a deep connection to the mystical undercurrent that connects all of reality. She's described their fight in this light because it's likely a more easy pill to swallow for her. It's worth note that this may not be subconscious. Cassie isn't stupid. Is it possible that she's a little more grounded in reality than I and others have previously given her credit for? Before we conclude this section of the video, I do want to cover the logistical aspects of her character that are established in the invasion in case somehow we're not already aware of them. Cassie's mom is a vet for the gardens. This is this sort of amusement park zoo hybrid, and her dad runs a wildlife rehabilitation clinic out of a barn on their property. This barn becomes the Animorphs' main base of operations as the series goes on. It's like the Gryffindor common room of Animorphs, and her access to animals through both the clinic and the gardens is essential to many of the Animorphs' missions. She's also a catalyst for the first battle of the Yeerkpool, as she's captured by a cop who was suspicious of them earlier in the book. It's heavily implied that she actually killed the controller who captured her, as she tells Jake that they won't have to worry about him anymore, but refuses to elaborate. This is especially noteworthy because it firmly establishes that, while Cassie may like to characterize the fight as a bunch of natural shamans fighting for the beautiful green earth, she is cognizant of the acts that she will have to take. I feel like this went over my head in all of the previous rereads of the series, but Cassie taking this controller's life, and it being written as clearly as it is a pretty brutal moment. It's the first death of a characterized controller, and by extension his host, and it's at Cassie's hands. This is pretty tragic. So now we're on to Cassie's books, and I'm putting the message and the secret and the unknown in the same section of this video because I think that they serve to establish the same themes, and because this video is looking like it's going to be pretty long, I'm going to briefly touch on the plots of these books and my main takeaways. The Message is the first book narrated by Cassie, and it establishes an important theme. Whatever force it is that makes Cassie good with animals applies to aliens too. This is the book where the Animorphs meet Axe, and a main plot point is these dreams that Cassie and Tobias Tobias keep having. They're dreams of the ocean and a strange feeling that someone is calling out to them. When Jake sees a news story about strange debris washing up on the beach and notices what looks like Andalite writing on it, Tobias and Cassie have such strong visions that they lose consciousness, and this leads to the Animorphs acquiring dolphins and going to investigate. Cassie, as a dolphin, talks to a whale, because of course she does, who tells her about a strange place under the ocean. The Animorphs decide that this must be a place of Andalite origin, and they wonder if what they're hearing is some type of distress beacon, and they reason that the reason that Cassie and Tobias are the ones most impacted by this is that Cassie is the best at morphing, and Tobias is trapped in a morph, so it must be morph related. I think the Animorphs are wrong, though. I think Tobias hears this beacon because he's part Andalite, and Cassie hears it because she's in touch with this ubiquitous force that's present in all living things, not just humans. The rest of the book is exposition about Axe and the debut of another Visser 3 morph. Spoiler alert, the sperm whale saves the day. Cassie morphs midair, which happens multiple times in the series. My main takeaway from this book, at least as far as Cassie's character development is concerned, is that her attunement to other living things is universal. It's not relegated to the human race. She communes with whales, she hears Axe's distress beacon. Cassie doesn't just advocate for animals, she's an advocate for life itself, and it seems that living things of all stripes will speak to and through her. This is going to become really important later. On to The Secret. The Secret is a heavy book, and in my initial plan for this video, I intended to briefly touch on the plot and themes, with the main takeaway being Cassie loves Earth more, but my goodness, I just reread this thing, and it is such a doozy. I will do my best to try to do it justice here. So in this book, the Yeerks have a logging operation, and they plan to destroy the forest in an attempt to bring the Andalite bandits, whom Visser 3 has rationalized must live in the woods near the Yeerk pool due to their frequent attacks. The Animorphs morph wolves to go check it out, and start a bit of a scuffle with some Yeerks. Later on, Cassie goes to help her dad with a skunk that's been reported injured on the side of the road. The skunk is badly burned, and Cassie recognizes the burn as Drake and Beamfire, a result of their fight with the Yeerks. She acquires the skunk, intent on morphing it and taking care of its babies while it's recovering. She morphs Owl and uses the owl's keen senses to locate the skunk litter. Shortly thereafter, the gang acquires termites in order to break into the Yeerk facility at the logging site. Remembering their recent horrifying experience with the ants, the group feels some trepidation, but makes sure to take termites from a colony that is already located on site before acquiring them, reasoning that this will prevent a similar experience to the ant nightmare. Spoiler alert again, it does not. The Animorphs are immediately overtaken by natural termite instincts, resulting in them blindly following the termite queen, and even once they've regained their sense of selves, the Animorphs find that they cannot resist the queen's orders. The pull is too strong. Cassie eventually finds herself in the termite queen's lair, where by tricking the termite mind into thinking that the queen is an enemy ant, Cassie uses her pincers to bite the queen's head off. Chaos ensues, but ultimately the gang is able to get what they need from the Yeerk computers. They learn that the Yeerks need to convince some board member that the logging operation is a good idea, and that they plan to make this board member a controller. Later, Cassie is looking for the skunk kits when she runs into Tobias. He knows where they are because he's eaten one, which gives Cassie a pang of resentment. Upon finding the litter, Cassie morphs, feeds them, and then falls asleep with them as a skunk. She's awoken by Jake, furious that she's almost eclipsed 2 hours in morph, and in the following argument, Cassie's feeling defeated, even going so far as to tell Jake that maybe the humans should lose the war to the Yeerks. Humans have survived by being the strongest, but now there's a stronger predator, and Jake reminds her that it's about more than the human race. It's about losing the people that they care about. And as he walks away, Cassie tells him that she will not abandon these skunk kits. The Animorphs all wind up agreeing to chip in to make sure that the skunks are fed and imprint onto their mother. In the final fight over the logging facility, Cassie and Tobias have a spirited discussion on the nature of humanity and its place in the universe. Tobias equates his decision to eat one of the skunk kits, which he can't apologize for, to the human race and all that they do in order to survive. Cassie continues to argue that the Yeerks are a part of the same system of life and death, and it's about to get really existential when some action interrupts them. Ultimately, the Animorphs win the ensuing battle, with Cassie using Skunk Morph to spray Visser 3, and the logging facility is closed. This book is really important for Cassie's development. It introduces the rationale that she will use for some of the atrocities that she and the rest of the Animorphs will commit in future books, with the termite lair being a sort of entry point, low-stakes genocide to get Cassie used to the idea. It isn't as easy as that for her, though. Caring for the baby skunks is a way for atoning for the destruction of the termite lair, as Jake correctly intuits, but it's also a way of minimizing the damage that the Animorphs do. Just because they need to act destructively in this war doesn't mean they can't also act compassionately in trying to minimize that damage. This obviously won't be feasible in the long term, though. It's kind of like carbon offsets. The destruction and compassion both exist in parallel. They don't just cancel each other out. Not to mention all of the human collateral that exists every time the Animorphs kill a controller, or even the lives of the Yeerks, but we will get more into that later. There's a much more important idea that's introduced in this book, though, and that's the idea of the Yeerk domination of the galaxy being ethically comparable to the human domination of Earth. The Animorphs talk about survival of the fittest frequently, especially since Tobias got trapped in Hawkmorph. What determines determines the fitness of a species for survival if not strength alone? What is the real difference between Yeerks subjugating the human race and Cassie destroying an entire termite colony to save herself and her friends? And most importantly, if Cassie, the leader of the termite genocide, can feel such compassion that she wants to minimize and offset the damage that she's done by nurturing life elsewhere, are Yeerks not capable of the same thing? This point isn't directly stated in the book, but on reread I found it to be such an obvious implication that I'm shocked I never noticed it before. So that's The Secret. Phenomenal book. Next I want to get into The Unknown, which is a bit of a funny one but still builds on the themes we've discussed. The basic plot of this book is that the humans have got their hands on a piece of alien technology and they're keeping it at the universe equivalent of Area 51. The Yeerks want to infiltrate this facility to find out what it is, as do the Animorphs, and it turns out that the Yeerks are using horses as controllers in order to achieve this goal. The Animorphs follow suit, they acquire horse morphs at a local race, which Cassie winds up inadvertently winning. They wind up joining a Yeerk herd, breaking into the facility and seeing the piece of alien equipment, with Axe disclosing to them after the fact that this piece of equipment was, in fact, an Andalite toilet. The Animorphs are ready to call it quits at this point until Cassie realizes the implications of what they've seen, and that Visser 3 will likely want to kill or infest any humans who have seen this evidence of sentient life in space. She reasons that knowledge of interstellar civilization would make humans less susceptible to alien takeover, which Visser 3 would want to prevent. She recalls a piece of paper she saw on the calendar at the gardens which had the name of the Area 51 shell company, Gondor Industries, which is obviously a Lord of the Rings reference. The Animorphs jump to the conclusion that the Visser must be planning to kidnap the employees at this event. I love these books, but the plots really do leap along sometimes. So the kids go to the gardens, they save the Area 51 guys, they thwart Visser 3, there's a House of Horror scene, the end. It's not my favorite book, it's a bit of a weird one like I said, but it's not offensive in any way. The only thing I want to point out about this book is that once again, when it comes to dealing with aliens in any capacity, whether directly or through their relics, regardless of their race, Cassie is probably going to be the one who narrates the book. It establishes that she's a bit of a diplomat, and it foreshadows the role that she'll play later on in the series. So on to possibly my favorite, or maybe my second favorite of the Cassie books, and that's The Departure. This is the one where Cassie meets Aftran, so let's dig in. The book opens with Cassie describing the Yeerks as evil and the Andalites as the opposite, and the narrative quickly shifts to a pretty brutal battle, opening with a scene of Cassie tearing out a Hork-Bajir throat. This is described in great detail. We hear about the Hork's scream, the smell of his fear hormones to Cassie's wolf nose, Axe wipes blood off his tail blade, Marco eats a Hork-Bajir arm. After the fight, Cassie tells the rest of the Animorphs that she quits, and she walks away. When she gets home, her dad tells her that the pet food company that sponsors the clinic that they run out of their barn has pulled its sponsorship. Cassie's mother notices that Cassie has something in her teeth, and this turns out to be a piece of Hork-Bajir flesh, and KA is really not holding back here. The scene sets us up for the transformation that Cassie's going to have throughout the book by demonstrating the juxtaposition between the way that she perceives the war against the Yeerks and the actions being taken on the ground by her. Her opening description of the Yeerks and Andalites is completely devoid of nuance. The Yeerks are evil, the Andalites are good, and Cassie is on the good side, so she's good too, even though she ends the evening by lying to her parents and picking the flesh of her enemy's hosts out of her teeth. The next day, Cassie skips school and the gang confronts her to try to convince her to stay on the team. After some discussion, she tells them that she's bothered by the fact that she's stopped feeling bad about killing. She killed the Hork-Bajir the other night after Jake told them all to back off, and while there was a time when this would have bothered her, it didn't. Losing this part of her is not a sacrifice that she's willing to make, so Cassie's quitting. The Animorphs react in anger, each taking it personally in their own characteristic way. I always liked Rachel's reaction the most. She tells Cassie that she thinks Cassie is quitting, basically because she can't stand the idea of turning into Rachel, and she's not entirely wrong. The next day, Cassie rides a horse out to a trough somewhere on their land. I am a city person, and I don't know about these things, and a little girl with red hair comes running out of the woods, and she's being chased by a bear, and Cassie rescues her. Action sequence happens. She winds up running off a cliff with the girl on horseback, and they land in a roiling river. I don't use that word very often, and Cassie is knocked unconscious, then saved by the girl. The girl introduces herself as Karen, and long story short, we find out that Karen is actually a controller. She's the sibling Yeerk, or the poolmate or something, of the Hork-Bajir that Cassie killed the other night. She followed Cassie after the battle, and now she knows or suspects that she's a human and that she can morph, and suspects that the rest of the Andalite bandits may be human as well. So now we're into the best part of this book, Cassie's conversations with Aftran, and all of the philosophical ruminations about war and conflict conflict and natural rights. I'm going to be referring to the Yeerk as Aftran now for the sake of narrative clarity, and when they refer to the human that Aftran's enslaving, I will be using the name Karen. Trust me, this will make it easier for everyone. So Cassie plays dumb for a while, contemplating the fact that she could kill Karen and Aftran both pretty easily. There's a lot at stake, and everyone would agree that this was justified. She did kill the Hork-Bajir at the beginning of the book for the same reason she killed a whole termite colony a few books ago. Instead of killing her though, she winds up helping by tending to Karen's injuries, and at this point we mostly hear Aftran talking straight Yeerk propaganda. Andalites are smug, elitists, humans are primitive apes. She's frustrated that Cassie is defying both of these expectations by showing her compassion, and Cassie, playing dumb, asks Aftran at one point to tell her about the Andalite and Yeerk conflict, and now we get to the true Yeerk elevator pitch for their cause. Yeerks have no senses, they have no capable bodies, and they are naturally parasites. They expand and grow by enslaving. Why should the Yeerks not have the same right to grow and to expand as the Andalites do? The only reason Andalites don't see it this way is because they're short-sighted, and their limited experience, their privilege, doesn't allow them to see any way of existence other than their own as viable, or ethical, or moral. This is the first time in the series that we've heard firsthand how the Yeerks perceive Andalites in the ongoing war, and it's ironic that while Aftran is frustrated that Cassie is defying her expectations, she's doing the same for Cassie. And while Aftran's rant starts out fairly propaganda-filled, it ends with a pretty fair argument. All species want to grow, to advance, and to evolve. Andalites and other able-bodied beings are able to do so independently. Yeerks do so by enslaving other races. For Yeerks, this is natural, and because it's natural, the Yeerks have a hard time perceiving it as evil, or even broaching that conversation. From the Yeerks' perspective, the Andalites have basically just come out of nowhere and told them that their entire way of life is evil, completely unprovoked. It would be like if aliens came down to Earth and told humans that we had to be vegans or they'd destroy our ability to go to space. It would be like if the United States told, like, Denmark or somewhere that they could no longer perform abortions or we'd cut off their ability to trade intercontinentally. In this light, it's hard to not at least empathize with the Yeerks. The plot advances when this leopard that we heard earlier, I think escaped from the gardens. Anyway, it attacks them and it forces Aftran to reveal the Dracon beam that she's been hiding and Cassie to morph in front of her. They achieve a temporary victory over the leopard, and with all the cards on the table, they have a frank conversation that night. Aftran tells Cassie that she knows Cassie's thinking about destroying her, which Cassie doesn't deny. She continues that she knows Cassie won't kill her, although she can't figure out why. Lamenting her host, a small, innocent child, Aftran winds up telling Cassie about the history of her hosts. She had a Ged first, and then was a Hork-Bajir warrior for a while, and then got a human host on Earth. In exchange, Cassie shares the story of the Animorphs. Aftran objects when Cassie describes Elfanger's death as a murder. She says there can be no murder in war. Cassie rebuts that Elfanger was helpless, but Aftran points out that the Hork-Bajir Cassie killed in the opening scene of the book was also helpless. This is super triggering to Cassie, and we get this bit of dialogue. Cassie, don't compare what your people do to what we do. You can't compare the attacker and the victim. You people started this war, and it's you invading my planet. Aftran, we have a right to live. Cassie, this isn't about living, it's about enslaving people. Aftran, it's what we are. We're parasites. You humans are predators. How many pigs and cows and chicken and sheep do you kill each year to survive? You think being a predator is morally superior to being a parasite? At least the host bodies we take remain alive. We don't kill them, chop them into pieces, and grill them over a charcoal fire in our backyards. Cassie, we're not pigs. Karen, oh yes you are. That's all you are to us. I've always found this to be a pretty compelling argument on behalf of the Yeerks. Aftran is really able to translate the relative morality of each way of life or conquest or expansion pretty accurately here. Humans breed animals specifically to slaughter them by the millions. Is that really morally superior to what Yeerks do? To assume so would be to assume knowledge of the afterlife, which I don't think any of us have. The final part about humans being pigs to Yeerks, I think, is just to establish that Aftran is still very hostile, and this is a pattern that Aftran repeats often. She divulges a little bit of information, she opens up a little, and then she lashes out in anger. As the reader, these passages are super effective. Further humanizing Aftran makes us question everything that we think that we know about the Yeerks so far, and makes us wonder if maybe destruction of one party isn't the only way out of this conflict. Appropriate that this would happen during one of Cassie's books. The following day, Aftran and Cassie are forced to work together to survive, and we learn still more about the Yeerks. Aftran has misplaced her Dracon beam, and is concerned about getting punished, which she describes as painful. More sympathy for Aftran. Aftran. The conversation continues, and ultimately Aftran winds up saying that she doesn't want another young female host. From this, Cassie's able to infer that Aftran is bothered by needing to enslave this human child. This is the first time that she realizes the possibility of turning Aftran over to her side rather than just killing her. She starts to ask more questions, probing to confirm her theory that Aftran's bothered by the necessity of enslaving Karen. Aftran insists that nothing bothers her, and Cassie pushes, describing what Karen's cries might sound like. Aftran tells her that Karen hates her and thinks terrible thoughts about her all day long, but Cassie doesn't believe her, and she tells Aftran that she believes that Karen really pities her. Karen reaffirms that she will be turning Cassie over to Visser 3 angrily in response. Again, this is Aftran's pattern. Later, the conversation continues, and Cassie tells Aftran how she feels jaded with her normal life now, which Aftran assumes is because Cassie's gotten used to the excitement of battle. Aftran had a similar experience transitioning to life as Karen after being a Hork-Bajir warrior. Cassie rejects the idea that battle makes her feel alive, though, explaining that it makes her feel like a hypocrite. She restates the main theme of the book. How can she say that she believes life is sacred and deal out so much death? Aftran replies by telling her that the Yeerks have people like her too. Yeerks who oppose wars or think that it's wrong to take unwilling hosts. Cassie is stunned by this news, and Aftran derides her for listening to Andalite propaganda and then shares something important to her. She tells Cassie how Yeerks are born and describes their senses, how they communicate, and how it took them thousands of years before they finally even found hosts with eyes. These were the Geds. She describes the first time that she saw color and how beautiful and moving it was. Cassie and Aftran are overlooking a meadow at this point, and Aftran indicates all around them, talking about the majesty that humans get to experience on a day-to-day basis. She says that humans live in paradise, and they hate the Yeerks for wanting to live there too. She distills the Yeerk conundrum pretty fairly. What can they do? Go back to Yeerk pools, to their home planet where Andalites will nuke them every time they dare leave? There are Yeerks who wish that there were a middle ground, Aftran says, but there just isn't. What would you do? Aftran asks Cassie. Cassie looks away, and as she does, she sees Chekhov's leopard pouncing. The scene repeats a lot of what is already established, but Aftran breaks her usual pattern, or at least doesn't have a chance to fulfill it because of the leopard. At the point where she might typically have told Cassie to go suck an egg, she gets kind of wistful instead, and it seems like Aftran genuinely laments that the Yeerks have this awful choice, and in so doing, she's acknowledging, for the first time of any Yeerk in this series so far, that there is something innately evil about enslaving others. This opens up a huge chasm in the logic of the universe. If the Yeerks are to be pitied because they're blind and can't experience the various joys of life, and if being a parasite is as natural to them as killing other organisms for food is for us, how can the act of parasitic enslavement be inherently evil? How can a Yeerk realize it as well? And if it is inherently evil, then how can we pity the Yeerks? What is the message here? I'm not trying to be nitpicky. These are just the thoughts that I have every time I read this book, and I love it. The ethics of existence is such a weighty topic and not one that's easy to convey through kids' literature, so hats off to KA and team once more for providing us all with this. Anyway, the leopard is about to strike when an osprey attacks it from out of the sky. The leopard still hits Karen, who's further injured, but the osprey is Marco, who winds up morphing gorilla, and he and Wolf Cassie are able to drive the leopard away. Afterward, Cassie initially tries to hide the fact that Karen is a controller from Marco, but he soon finds out, and Marco immediately wants to kill Karen and Aftran both, which is what we would expect from Marco, the eternally rational, sardonic pragmatist. Marco's argument essentially boils down to, should we not kill Yeerks because they hide behind humans, which Cassie can't reply to because the book opened with her killing an innocent Hork-Bajir to get to this same controller's poolmate, and Marco turns to Aftran and he gives her an ultimatum. Leave the child and die a Yeerk, or stay in the child and kill them both. At this point, Cassie says that Karen should have a chance to speak, and she puts her ear against the child's, and Aftran slithers in. Or pumps in, whatever it is that Yeerks do. And Cassie immediately realizes, even as she loses control of her body, what Marco already realized. Aftran can now use Cassie's morphing power. Marco flies away to get the rest of the Animorphs, and Cassie and Aftran learn a little bit about each other. In the exchange of memories, Cassie experiences sight for the first time through Aftran's Ged host's eyes, with all of the accompanying Yeerk emotion. She sees that Aftran too is saddened by the death that she has to deal out as a Hork-Bajir warrior, and that she chose Karen as her host in a hope of getting away from the more visceral aspects of war. For Aftran's part, she learns of the guilt that Cassie felt after killing Estrel 731, the Hork-Bajir in the beginning of the book, and the Termite Queen, and she also sees the last few days through Cassie's eyes. While they're settling into one another, Aftran morphs Osprey and gets to experience flight for the first time. This is brilliant, using the Yeerk's qualities as a parasite to enable this deep connection between the two characters, and making this be the way that Cassie, the most empathetic of the Animorphs, is truly introduced to the Yeerk experience. She can't possibly leave this unmoved. But it also allows Aftran to see Cassie's earnestness. It kind of fast-tracks trust in one another, and it was a pretty brilliant move on Cassie's part to forward her goal of winning Aftran over. This took a lot of faith and is probably the single most consequential act of the series. Maybe. We'll see how I feel at the end of this. This also kind of condenses and concentrates the sympathy we've built up for Aftran to this point and shoots it right into our veins. As they fly, Aftran and Cassie have a really honest conversation about how to best proceed. Aftran refuses to believe that the two of them can make peace between humans and Yeerks, but Cassie clarifies that she's only looking to make peace between the two of them, one human and one Yeerk. Because of the position that they're in, Aftran is able to verify her sincerity beyond any shadow of a doubt, and she wonders if Cassie understands the sacrifice that she's asking for. Without a host, Aftran will be blind, she'll be semi-deaf, she'll be restricted to the confines of the Yeerk pool, and she asks Cassie what she would do in her situation. And when Cassie refuses to answer, Aftran searches Cassie's mind, and she finds that Cassie honestly believes that she would go back to the Yeerk pool. She would make the sacrifice. And with that, they fly back towards Karen. I just have to remark again how brilliant it was for Cassie to let Aftran infest her. She had to trust so deeply that Aftran would take an opportunity for genuine peace if one was presented to her. In taking this leap of faith, she risked everything. Her freedom, the safety of the Animorphs, all of Earth. Honestly, if I were Marco or Jake, I would have a hard time forgiving Cassie for this, regardless of how it turns out. To take that kind of liberty with consequences of that magnitude is ballsy, that's all I will say. On the way back to Karen, Aftran warns the Yeerks of the Andalite bandits coming their way, which gives Cassie initial pause before she realizes that Aftran referred to them as Andalites. They demorph and Aftran reinfests Karen. Aftran asks Cassie with Karen's mouth what she wants her to do. Andalites, humans, there's no difference between the two, she says. They're both smug, moralizing, physically able races from beautiful worlds, gifted with sight and senses, who hate Yeerks for wanting the same. Cassie argues that they can't help what they're born as, and that the Yeerks were just born as slugs. They can't help that their advancement is contingent upon enslaving other races, but that doesn't make it right. And Aftran looks at her, and she nods, and she says, I know. What a moment this is. Aftran knows that the only way her species can experience much of the joy that carbon-based life has to offer is inherently wrong and evil, and the painful part is, Andalites and a lot of humans are smug, moralizing, privileged races with no real moral high ground to stand on. Who knows what a given human would do if placed in the same position? How many of us might willingly take the sight of another to guarantee our own? Some, probably. Aftran then poses her deal to Cassie. If Cassie morphs a caterpillar and stays that way for 2 hours, Aftran will leave Cassie for good, and Cassie accepts. We cut to Jake's perspective, and I'm gonna skim through this part because it's mostly just plot things. The Animorphs manage to locate Karen, who tells them what's happened. They deliberate what to do with her, and Aftran says, we are not all like Visser 3. Some of us are just little Yeerks, unimportant nobodies who are caught up in this war. Some of us also want peace. Some of us want to find a better way, but how can we give up everything and leave the universe to the Andalites? They'll never feel anything but hate and contempt for us. Cassie did not hate. This is what I think KA wants us to leave this book with. The Yeerks are not all like Visser 3. Some of them are just people trying to get by. They're in an untenable position and would like a way out. Jake decides to let everyone decide for themselves what to do, and they wind up letting Karen go. We resume Cassie's perspective, where she emerges from what feels like a long sleep, realizing that she's metamorphosed into a butterfly. Back to Jake, the gang, learning that Cassie is emerging, rushes to see, and as they watch her, Axe offhandedly mentions that she probably can morph back again due to this naturally occurring morph resetting the morph timer. A little convenient, but there it is. The Animorphs chase the butterfly. Back to Cassie again, and she's recapping. The wildlife clinic has been funded again. Some big investment banker's daughter, whom we know is Karen, was apparently insistent that he keep the clinic afloat, and Cassie wonders whether it was Karen or Aftran who did this for her. Weeks later, she sees Karen in the mall, and Karen tells her that she's free. So here's what I think the 3 main points of this book are. 1, the Yeerks are people too. Like any war, there are Yeerks on the ground who are fighting for something that they don't believe in because they feel like they have no other choice. Given the innate circumstances of their existence, others should not judge. 2, war is multifaceted. There is no good side. The Andalites aren't necessarily a force of pure good for the galaxy, and a lot of what they know about Yeerks is likely propaganda, as much of what the Yeerks know about Andalites is. And number 3, Cassie is an advocate for life, not just for humans or for good. She is simply an advocate for whatever the unifying force force is that connects all of life. I wish there were a good term for this force that connects all of us, penetrates us, and lives within us. This book marks an important moment for the reader as well, because while previously the only conceivable way that the war could have ended, for me at least, was the Yeerks being destroyed by the Animorphs with the Andalites riding in to save the day in some capacity, now we've explored the Yeerk origin story a bit, and we know that there are some Yeerks who are actively working to find an alternative solution to enslaving other beings, and it seems like there may be some other possibilities, some other outcomes. They're not entirely clear yet, but they will get more clear as we go on, and they are all a product of Cassie and her unfailing need to follow Mother Nature's instructions. I'm wearing my mushroom shirt for Cassie and her natural inclinations here. So that was the departure, and we will likely be referring back to it throughout the video. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the suspicion. If you disagree with my reasoning here, you can comment. I don't like the suspicion because I can't stand the Helmicrons. I find them to be so annoying, and I get that they're supposed to be annoying, but I still can't stand them. It is what it is. If there's ever a new TV adaptation, I hope they do include the Helmicrons because I'm sure they'd be funny, but that is the only positive thing that I have to say about them. Anyway, the crux of this novel is that the aforementioned Helmicrons, an alien race, have come to Earth in search of the morphing cube, which will now be known as the Escafil device. The Escafil device is a power source for the Helmicrons, who are an inch tall and can shrink and enlarge people with their shrinking ray. The Animorphs have some fun fights with them. They learn that females are in charge in their society and that the Helmicrons also don't like the Yeerks. The Animorphs ultimately pit the Yeerks and the Helmicrons against each other. Chaos ensues. Cassie morphs whale to crash a ship for the whatever number of times this is. And finally, a stalemate occurs and everyone walks away mostly unharmed and their original sizes. What is it about the 90s and our fascination with shrinking and enlarging things? Anyway, I am probably missing some nuance, and you can let me know in the comments section what specific parts you'd highlight as important to Cassie's development, but the main point that I'd say the book conveys that supports my ongoing case for Cassie's value is that this reinforces the idea that she is the best suited among them for diplomatic missions. Pretty much anything involving commingling with aliens is in Cassie's wheelhouse. It also establishes that she can be pretty Machiavellian at times. So next we've got the Sickness, and this is one that I'm going to be spending some time on because I love it and because it pretty much is the sequel to The Departure. I had limited funds for Animorphs books as a kid, and I read them all out of order piecemeal just based off of what I saw and what I could get, and just saw Cassie morphing into a Yeerk on the cover and knew that it had to be read. So this book starts with Cassie introducing herself as nice and then telling us about the Hork-Bajir whose throat that she ripped out. She then describes the ongoing conflict with the Yeerks, but this time with the caveat that the Yeerks aren't purely evil, and gives the reader some insight as to what life is like as a Yeerk without a host. If a Yeerk wants to be free, it has to make another living creature a slave. She then talks about choice, and about how the hardest choice that she's had to make was whether or not to continue being an Animorph. She states that by the time the war is over, she will be permanently changed, and this is a really big shift from her pre-departure mentality. She is now willing to sacrifice the part of herself that she was so concerned with preserving for the duration of the departure. The book's plot kicks off with a school dance that Rachel has pressured Jake into asking Cassie to. Axe is in human morph even. Tobias has morphed human for the occasion. Tobias actually makes an Austin Powers joke because he and Axe had been watching it the night prior in his scoop, which I love for many reasons. Anyway, Cassie and Jake wind up dancing together, and as they're dancing, she notices that a stalk eye is beginning to grow from Axe's head. He's starting to morph. They quickly walk over to him, and he's acting pretty erratic even for Axe in human morph, and Rachel wraps a flannel over his head, and they prepare to make a quick exit. As they're leaving, they run into Chapman and another teacher, Mr. Tidwell, who's apparently super strict. Chapman's got some questions for them, but Tidwell says he'll handle it, and he follows the Animorphs into the bathroom where Axe demorphs and knocks him on his ass. Tidwell tells Cassie that he knows Axe is an Andalite, he knows who they are, and he is a Yeerk named Ilum. Ilum tells Cassie that he has a message from Aftran. Aftran's been taken by Yeerk security. She's currently imprisoned in the Yeerk pool, and she will be interrogated by Visser 3 within the next few days. Ilum, on behalf of the Yeerk Peace Movement, which is a thing, has come to ask for the Animorphs' help. The gravity of the situation is not lost on Cassie. If Visser 3 interrogates Aftran, he will eventually get the information he wants, and Aftran has been inside Cassie's head. She knows the identity of all of the Animorphs. She knows where they live. She knows where they go to school. She knows everything that Cassie knows. Also not lost on Cassie is the fact that she is the one who made Aftran such a liability. Any of the other Animorphs would have just killed her, probably killed Karen too. So the Animorphs manage to escape with Axe in tow, and they relocate him to Cassie's barn where they set him up in a stall. They get Eric to come and project a hologram to disguise him. Axe is briefly lucid enough to tell them what's going on. He says he has a disease called yamfoot, in which harmful organisms collect in his tria gland, which ultimately bursts and kills him when his fever reaches a certain point. It's like an alien appendix. The only cure is to remove the tria gland, which is located located in Axe's head. The Animorphs move away from Axe to discuss how to handle this, but the conversation quickly shifts when Marco demands that Cassie tell him about the conversation between her and Tidwell. She debriefs the group, and while they suspect that this is probably a trap, they reason that there's too much at stake for them to ignore this potential threat. The group definitely feels some resentment towards Cassie for putting them all at risk like this. Internally, Cassie still believes that she made the right choice in trusting Aftran, but she is definitely beginning to feel some doubt. The gang decides to rescue Aftran that very night, as they'll likely take the Yeerks by surprise, so even if it's a trap, they'll have a little bit more of a chance of escaping, and they'll probably be back before Axe's tria gland bursts. Marco has the brilliant idea to infiltrate the Yeerk pool using the sewage system, and soon enough, Tobias has provided them all with eels to morph, and they are on their way to the water tower in town. The plan is to ride its current down, and with instructions provided by Eric, they will find their way eventually to the Yeerk pool. This plan does not go well. The Animorphs get off to a shaky start. They have trouble controlling the eel instincts, and they're soon struggling to keep track of where they're going in this maze of pipes. And as Jake struggles to remember the directions, Cassie notices that he may have the same sickness that Axe has. He's acting super groggy and out of it. And if they're eels stuck in sewage pipes, Jake can't demorph. If he has uncontrollable demorphing spasms like Axe did, it could be deadly, so they decide to get out of the pipes ASAP, and they follow the current of water through the pipes until they are shot out of a fire hose and into a burning building. And they manage to demorph, morph birds, and fly away safely. Cassie and Marco wind up walking Jake home, and I really love this scene. Cassie and Marco are extremely dissimilar, and they very rarely find themselves on the same side of an ethical argument, but they both love Jake. Cassie's also adopted a small amount of Marco's gritty pragmatism at this point. She had to in order to get through the events of the departure without quitting the Animorphs for good. When they finally get to Jake's house, they tell his mom that he has the flu, and she lets them know that Rachel's already informed her. She's on the phone with her right now. Cassie asks to speak to Rachel, who tells Cassie that she spoke to Axe and that Jake should experience flu-like symptoms, but nothing more than that. Unfortunately, this disease is very contagious, so it's likely that they all will get sick. And she hangs up, and Cassie stands there wondering, if they all get sick, who will save Aftran? Who will operate on Axe? She spends the night taking shifts morphing Fly and watching Jake in case he starts to morph or reveal critical information in his feverish state, and the next day Cassie checks on Axe and then goes to school, and she notices that Rachel isn't there, so she finds a payphone, God bless the 90s, and calls Rachel's house, where her mother informs Cassie that Rachel is sick. At lunch, Cassie is looking for Marco when Mr. Tidwell approaches, and he tells her that Visser 3 is returning to Earth early and that he may interrogate Aftran as soon as that night. Cassie has some questions, and Ilum winds up giving her some of his backstory. He tells her that when he first entered Tidwell, he was not a part of the Yeerk peace movement, and Tidwell was his slave. In fact, it was Tidwell's distress that partly motivated Ilum to join the peace movement. Tidwell's agony was palpable and always present in Ilum's mind, forcing Ilum to accept what he had done to him. And at the same time, Ilum began to hear about a group of Yeerks who thought that it was wrong to take an unwilling host. Ilum lets Tidwell speak, allegedly, and Tidwell tells Cassie that he invited Ilum to stay in his body. He was super depressed pre-Ilum, his wife had just died, and he felt like he had no reason to live, and when Ilum gave him his freedom back, he realized that he wanted to do something with it. Reasoning that he and Ilum could do more together than apart, he invited Ilum to stay inside him, and they both decided to join the fight. Tidwell states that he actually likes Ilum now. He appreciates his company. This knowledge of the Yeerk peace movement and of Tidwell's status as a voluntary host is revelatory, but also kind of confusing. We already know that there are voluntary hosts, but they're always depicted as somehow morally bankrupt, having taken the side of the Yeerks. I'm curious as to how a voluntary controller might react to finding out that a Yeerk was a member of the peace movement. Would that controller, that human, then be a liability? This comes up again later in the books. Cassie tells Ilum that she wants to help, but the group is sick. Can't the Yeerk peace movement do something about this themselves? Ilum lets her know that while the Yeerk peace movement is growing, not all of them have hosts, and those who do have hosts aren't all well suited for battle. And once Visser 3 breaks Aftran, he's going to know who all of them are, and he's going to have everything. The Animorphs' true identities, the Yeerk peace movement's identities. There's far too much at stake here for them to do nothing. Cassie is convinced, and she agrees to help even if she has to do it alone. She then asks Ilum how long he can survive outside of Mr. Tidwell without being in a Yeerk pool. What could her plan possibly be? Later, Cassie's debriefing Marco, who, surprise surprise, seems a little bit off, and when she gets to the part where she morphs Yeerk, Marco starts throwing up, and now it's just Cassie and Tobias remaining. And as he fades into delirium, Marco asks Cassie, what will she do if her plan succeeds? And at this, Cassie realizes that she does not not have a plan for Aftran. She may have to rescue her friend just to watch her die. Cassie returns to the barn, and Axe's fever is nearing the point where his tria gland will burst. Tobias has been keeping him company, and Cassie tells him that he may need to do this surgery if she doesn't get back from rescuing Aftran in time. She goes and collects all of the surgical tools that they're going to need, and she brings them to the operating room, and when she returns, Tobias flies into a rafter, and Cassie realizes that he is sick too. So she locks him in a cage in the barn, and the weight of her task just hits her. She knows that she now needs to go rescue Aftran quickly and escape with her life and Aftran's, and then do brain surgery on Axe, and then figure out what to do with Aftran. She's having a bit of an internal freak out, but she comforts herself by thinking about how she had to deal with the original Aftran situation alone, and she made the correct choices then, at least until Aftran was captured and betrayed the whole resistance potentially. Now that I think about it, Cassie going at it alone is kind of a recurring theme in Animorphs. Tobias is obviously the loner of the group, but Cassie definitely finds herself taking entire books to herself to be introspective quite a bit. She is nearly the only Animorph present in The Departed, and in the future she'll spend the unexpected alone as well. In this book she has to complete the mission by herself, a double mission really when you include Axe's sickness, and in The Unknown earlier she had her own side mission with the skunks too. Maybe I'm overanalyzing things, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. Cassie travels to Mr. Tidwell's house, where Ilum exits Mr. Tidwell's ear. Cassie acquires him and puts him in a Ziploc bag full of water, which Mr. Tidwell places in his pocket, and she then morphs Yeerk. And she describes being deaf and blind, capable of only the slowest movement. She can do some basic sonar, but that's about all of the perception of the outside world that she has as a Yeerk. She infests Tidwell, and she feels jolts of amazement as each new sense opens up to her. The beauty of sound, of sight, of color are overwhelming, and she stands there in awe before Tidwell shakes her out of it and tells her it's time to go. They drive to the Yeerk pool, they successfully navigate the Gleep biofilter, which of course does not detect any unauthorized life forms, and once again Cassie finds herself at the Yeerk pool. This scene really completes Cassie's transformation into Yeerk sympathizer, or at least as close as an Animorph can get to being a Yeerk sympathizer. In The Departure, she was disillusioned of the simplistic view that the Andalites are good and the Yeerks are evil, first because of the conversations that she had with Aftran, and later by being infested by Aftran. She was able to feel through Aftran's memories the revelations of sight and sound. Now she's experiencing these revelations firsthand, and even with her prior knowledge and Aftran's memories as reference, she is still so floored by the sudden access to sensation in contrast with the Yeerk's usual existence that she forgets both of her missions and just gets lost in the sight of a tablecloth. I also would be remiss to not point out how weird and unnecessary this plan is. Cassie morphs Yeerk, infests Tidwell, and then takes Ilum in her pocket as a Yeerk, and this works. The Gleep biofilter doesn't say, okay, there's two Yeerks and one human, something's going on here. I'm curious as to why Cassie doesn't just morph Yeerk and then hide in Tidwell's pocket, because Ilum definitely would be more adept at navigating the entry to the Yeerk pool than she is. Or if the Gleep biofilter doesn't count entities, why doesn't Cassie just walk into the Yeerk pool with Tidwell? I get that this would be too risky, but seriously, this plan is flawed. I do understand its narrative point though. I just spent like 5 minutes talking about how crucial this is to completing Cassie's transformation into Yeerk sympathizer, so we can move on from this one as well. So Cassie drives to the Yeerk pool as Tidwell, and the Yeerk pool is typically horrifying, and I feel like Kay was extra descriptive of the horrors this time. There are crying children, too young to understand why and how their freedom is being stripped from them. Cassie witnesses an adult host try to escape. He has like a classic kill me moment when the Yeerks just stun him and re-enslave him. There are voluntary hosts watching Full House as usual. For some reason, they're always watching Full House, I feel like. Cassie notices that the Yeerk pool is rapidly expanding, a thought that gives her little comfort, and she lines up for the Yeerk pool, and when she arrives, she discreetly drops Ilum in before exiting Tidwell herself. This way, Ilum can reinfest him later. She swims around the pool as a Yeerk for a bit before finding a cage suspended in the pool. This must be Aftran. She wants to open the cage, but as a Yeerk without hands, this is easier said than done. She's contemplating demorphing when Visser 3 shows up, and Aftran's cage is raised from the Yeerk pool. Cassie quickly infests the next host to be shoved into the pool, who turns out to be a voluntary controller. Carefully keeping her thoughts and feelings tightly locked away, she uses the host body to launch herself at Visser 3. She's able to snatch Aftran from the Visser's hands and dives into the Yeerk pool, where she quickly leaves the human host. The human host is removed from the pool, where Visser 3 quickly realizes that she has no Yeerk. He initially reasons that this must mean that there's a second Yeerk helping Aftran before exclaiming that the Andalite bandits must be there. Rereading this book, I wonder why the Visser makes this assumption. He knows that there's a Yeerk peace movement in some capacity, although I guess this does just reinforce the fact that V3 is just not the most competent dude. I also again have some questions though about the voluntary host that Cassie winds up in. She prevents any thought from reaching the host out of caution, but wouldn't a voluntary host be happy to see a Yeerk peace movement that would lead to less death and potentially more voluntary hosts? Again, I get why Cassie did this, but this book is raising a lot of questions about voluntary hosts for me. Like, it seems like being a voluntary host makes them want other humans to die or like be on the side of the Yeerks, and that just doesn't make too much sense. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit more at some point. Anyway, Cassie is meanwhile demorphing in the Yeerk pool, trying to decide what she should morph to escape. She goes for Owl, but then realizes that its feathers will be too waterlogged to fly and switches to Osprey. She thought speaks at Aftran to get between her talons, and after an extreme struggle is able to fly out of the Yeerk pool. Visser 3 has morphed a tentacle beast whose tentacles have paralyzing stingers, and he zaps her a few times, but Cassie musters all of her strength, and after pooping on a hunter robot and narrowly escaping the Gleep biofilter, she escapes with Aftran in her talons, and she arrives back at the barn to find Axe in crisis. Cassie prepares for surgery on Axe and realizes that she still doesn't know where the tria gland is specifically. Her only option is to put Aftran in Axe's head and let her guide Cassie. This works, though as Axe regains consciousness, he's extremely distressed to find himself infested, and as Cassie completes the surgery, Aftran tells her that Axe says he would rather die than let a Yeerk infest him, and Cassie says that he doesn't understand, and Aftran simply replies, he does, and exits his body. As Cassie finishes patching Axe up, he's lamenting the Yeerk that infested him, and Cassie reprimands him, telling him that the Yeerk he's talking about just saved his life, and nearly gave her own life for peace between human and Yeerk. And now, unless Cassie can think of something to do, that Yeerk is going to die. I love this resolution. Cassie's decisions in the departure have been a source of tension between her and the group, but even notwithstanding the Yeerk peace movement and the future impact that the Aftran solution has, if it weren't for Cassie's decision to save Aftran, both then and now, Axe would die from Yamfoot. There's no way that Cassie would be able to figure out where this gland is located without her. It also forces the rest of the group to accept Cassie's decision, even to trust Aftran a bit. Axe can be horrified all he wants, but Cassie is correct here. Later, Cassie lets Aftran infest her. She thanks Aftran for saving Axe's life, and in return, Aftran asks that Cassie kill her. Cassie refuses, but Aftran argues that this is the best way for her to go, the only way. She does not want to die of Kendrona starvation. Cassie offers to be Aftran's host, but Aftran refuses. Cassie would have to go to the Yeerk pool every 3 days. The risk would be too great. Aftran tells Cassie, it's not so bad to die for what you believe in. There are much worse deaths. Many worse deaths. We cut to the final scene, and the Animorphs are gathering on the beach, sharing stories about their experience being sick. They're watching the water when a humpback whale breaches, and we find out that this is Aftran. It was Jake who thought of a solution. They could give Aftran the power to morph on the condition that she pick one morph and stay in it forever. Cassie is smiling out at the ocean, and Jake asks what's up. And Cassie says that every now and again they actually win one. And Jake clarifies, this time, Cassie won one. What a game changer this book is. What an important book. This solidifies Cassie's status as intergalactic diplomat and champion of life, and we now have 2 alternate resolutions to the Yeerk conflict on the table. The Yeerk peace movement and voluntary hosts, and what I'll be calling the Aftran solution going forward, letting them morph animals and stay that way. This is in addition to the obvious kill all Yeerks resolution that I assumed the books would have right up to the departure. Cassie's decisions and sensibilities are having a huge impact on the direction of this entire series at this point, and it's changing her in the process. So that's the sickness, and I think I'm gonna cut it here because this script is 16 pages long and I am itching to get a video out. Stay tuned for part 2 where we'll be getting into the remaining Cassie books, and then we'll reassess my previous ranking. Oh, I almost forgot. This is more Animorphs books. I am going to be doing another giveaway, probably in the next video, so, you know, stay tuned, watch it if you want free Animorphs books. I can't imagine that I'm not gonna get a ton of duplicates since my collection is actually looking pretty decent right now. So, yeah, stay tuned. See you soon.